right, guys, we are live. Oh, okay, there goes Nozipho. This goes Nozipho, co-host. So welcome. I just accepted the request. Z. Get it?
Oh, 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 I'm so far.
Hi.
Hello,
How are you?
I'm good at yourself.
I'm well. You still at
Why am
work?
I this far? Yeah, I am at work.
That's good. Thank you. So welcome, and I'm sure you're really looking forward to the show tonight.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. So yeah, tell me, what are you expecting to get from it?
Yo, a lot, a lot. I mean, we have been discussing about gender-based violence and also the things that we can do to fight this gender-based violence and advices from our different guests. So I'm looking forward into new things, into new ways on how we can fight this gender-based violence, on what as individuals, on things that we can do as individuals in our respective places, in our homes, at the workplace, to fight this gender-based violence and also the gender inequalities.
Okay. Thank you very much. And so while we wait for others to join us, we'll just quickly just give a brief of what we're doing. So we are One African Forum, and the other gender is a campaign by the Y3DG to fight against, ultimately end gender-based violence, gender inequality, and unhealthy patriarchy across Africa. And so this continental campaign that's been running for weeks now has actually got so much impact, and I'm actually really happy seeing the direction we're headed. And the Y3DG, to put that right, is the young, the dynamic, determined, and daring generation, which was commissioned in 2020 during our African conference. And it's a decade campaign. It's a decade campaign to raise this crop of people between 2020 and the end of the decade, this very decade. So we have a lot on our plate that we're running, and so one of the primary campaign of the Y3DG in 2021 was to embark on this campaign. And when the team brought the idea to me, I'm like, that's amazing. Let's run it. It's one of the things I've been very passionate about, and I'm really grateful to the team for doing that. So tell me, okay, our guest is on now, so I'll be adding her on while we also wait for others to join us. So tell me, just a quick one. Um, from the lessons you've been learning from all our conversations, right? Have you at any point maybe seen a change, maybe just around you, or have you been able to learn how to deal with certain issues just around you?
Yeah. I've learned a lot, and one thing I would say that I've learned is firstly the definition, because most of the people, they think when you talk about gender-based violence, you talk about women abuse or children abuse, not
Okay.
counting the other gender, and in this case, males. You know, I've learned the definition actually, and also be able to use it in my own space. That it's not only females that are abused because of their gender. It's not only children that are abused, also the male counterparts, they are abused, and also we should allow them space. We should give them space to voice out whatever that they are feeling. And also that we should be a generation that speaks about things. We should be able to express our emotions, because sometimes people don't know how we feel, and as a result they don't see that as an abuse. So we should be able to talk, whether in a relationship, in a friendship, like be in a space that we are willing to express our emotions and our feelings. And that's what I've learned so far in this forum.
All right, thank you very much. That's really, really, really interesting, and I'm really happy. I'm happy you've actually had to learn these things, and and yeah, so we're moving forward. And right here we have our guest for tonight. I mean, she's such an amazing and incredible person. I mean, I don't know. I know, Nozipho, you're welcome. I know you may not remember this, but I met you some time ago in 2015 at CNBC Africa.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah, actually. And from then I'm like, oh, this lady, she's got real potentials, you know. So yeah, so I came with a group of students, you know, it was a debate for Sona, and so on, you know, and that was it. And yeah, so it's good to finally have you here, and you're welcome. You're welcome. So just quick one before we dive straight in, would you just tell us who is Nozipho?
Sure. That's a big question, and I'm certain that you don't want this to be for my answer to take up the whole live. But professionally, I identify as a conversation strategist. I like to think simply, if I describe my work, that I help smart people have simple conversations that make the world a better place. And I do that a lot with international organizations like the United Nations, like the World Bank, the IMF, the African Union, and you name it. But I think at a more personal level, I'm a daughter, I'm a wife, I'm a sister. I come from the town of Pietermaritzburg in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. And I think I'm a little bit of a nerd at heart and an activist at the same time. One of the phrases I've recently learned is, I think I would describe myself as a joyful warrior.
A joyful warrior. Wow, that's interesting. Okay. Well, it's good. It's good to meet you. It's good to have you here, the joyful warrior. Thank you. I mean, I'm really grateful when the team reached out to you, to your team, and I mean, when we got the feedback from them, I was like, "Oh, okay, this is amazing. You know, we're gonna really have an interesting conversation." So, right, we're diving right in. That's my co-host there, Nozipho,
Hello. Nice to meet you, Nozipho.
and I'm
Nice
Prince.
to meet you too, Nozipho.
And I'm Prince. So, just quickly, we're talking about gender-based violence and gender inequality. And like I said briefly, while we just started the show, we're trying. It's a campaign by the Y3G of One African Forum to fight against and ultimately end gender-based violence, gender inequality, and unhealthy patriarchy across Africa. And so the theme of the campaign is the other gender. You know, so we're trying to balance the equation and the status quo. You know, like Nozipho was saying earlier, there's been this notion generally that gender-based violence is abuse against women and against children, you know, sidelining the men out of it or the other gender. And then there comes some men advocates. I think we just got one man advocate had just come on now. Just there comes some men advocate that comes and say, no, man, men are the ones who have been abused. Women are just, you know, they're just outspoken, you know, and that's it. And then so the equation is not balanced. And so this campaign seeks to balance the equation. It make everyone understand, you know, women are indeed really being abused, you know, and we can't shy away from that fact. And men are also not left out as well. And if we have to fight these, we have to actually have this simultaneous approach and bring everyone to the table, you know, and say, guys, what is it? You know, and that's what the other gender really stands for. So thank you. Then quickly, in your opinion, how would you define abuse?
You know, it's such a good question, because when we pause to think about what abuse is, we realize it's both visible and invisible. We can see abuse in the form of sort of physical abuse, but there are invisible aspects of it. So we're talking emotional abuse, psychological abuse, things that you can't see. But I think what the other element to this definition is that abuse does not discriminate when it comes to its victims. And so, as much as we can say both men and women are victims of abuse, so are the girl child as well as the boy child victims of abuse. It doesn't also discriminate in terms of age.
You can't make the assumption that just because somebody is older, they are maybe going to be the one who's, for example, perpetrating child abuse. We now know that even there are elderly members in our communities who are being abused by younger members of the community or even within their own family. And so I think the one thing that is consistent about all of these definitions is that abuse does not discriminate when it comes to its victims. It can be seen, but it's also invisible. It has many facets. And because of that, oftentimes it's very hard, not only for the person who's being abused, to really trust their own guts that this is not normal, that this is abuse. So if you don't have physical scars to show, but you are in a relationship where you are being psychologically manipulated, usually the perpetrator is so good at doing that they try and create an even confusion with yourself so that you're not even sure whether am I really being abused or am I just being an ungrateful wife, as an example. And so I think it's a very complex, multifaceted phenomena that happens in every direction and that cannot be rooted in sort of a single frame or single understanding, but it can manifest in many, many ways.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, you just put it out there, it can manifest in many ways. So we cannot really pin a definition on abuse, particularly when we're talking about gender based violence. You know, we can pin it there. And then that's interesting. I really appreciate that. Now, in seeing and understanding the society, and from your explanation now, we can't really paint what abuse is. Okay. However, we can, for any reason, understand when we are being abused. Like you said, it takes courage to identify and say, you know what, this is not it. You know, you understand. But there are victims and there are perpetrators. Do you think these abuses? What do you think make these abuses? Are they born abusers? The people we have born leaders, right? This is some are born leaders, some are made leaders. You know, do we also have such phenomena in abusers? Are they born abusers or they're made?
I think it's a fantastic question. So let me start off with a disclaimer that I don't believe that they're born leaders. I think everybody has the ability and the capability to learn leadership. So that's my first disclaimer. And so using that disclaimer, if I bring into the question of abusers, or are they born abusers or made abusers, I do not believe that any child is born into this world with an abusive mindset, an abusive heart, an abusive capability. I think abuse is a learned behavior. And so let me talk a little bit about what I mean by that. I think abuse is learned through observation. So as a child, you're growing up and you're realizing that, well, the abuser or the perpetrator at home has power over other people, and they leverage that power through abuse. And so you observe and you begin to learn that if I want power, it means that I need to be abusive. You learn sometimes that some abuse is because it's a protective measure. So you might find that you grow up in a household where maybe the mother is abusing the father, and the father in retaliation uses physical violence to protect himself, or vice versa, right? And so as a child, you grow up learning that in order to protect myself against hurt and to protect myself against the world, I need to abuse. You grow up in a family realizing that the person who abuses others, physically, psychologically, emotionally, financially even, is the most respected in the family, because we do these things within our cultures. We lift up and we give a pedestal to abusers because we somehow put a lot of value to being feared. And the child grows up believing that, okay, if I want to be respected, if I want a place of standing in the society, I need to be abusive to a certain extent. You know, we grew up with, always you'll have that one person in the community that your parents would scare you with. You know, if you don't listen, I'm going to take you to so and so, and they're going to beat the living daylight out of you, you know. And that person almost becomes a boogeyman in your they become a boogeyman in your life and in your experience. And in a way, what we have taught that child is that this person in the community that we all hold in such high esteem because they are the disciplinarian in the community, and we see this as a good light. And the child then learns that for me to be respected in my community, I have to use brute force so that I then get that, I get my place and that respect. And so we teach children to become abusers, and they observe abuse in their own households. They observe abuse even in schools. They might come from a family where there is no abuse, but the way the teacher exerts their power over other pupils, that child grows up learning that if I want influence and I want people to do what I want them to do, what I need to do is use my physical force. And so to your question, Prince, there isn't a single child in my view that is born abusive. I think we all, those who become abusers, learn through observation. And there's this thing called deliberate practice that I just want to talk a little bit about. This idea that we sometimes as the community applaud the wrong things. So for example, you will have a child who is a toddler and that child is physically violent. And instead of seeking help for that child, we elevate it and we say, hey, this child is, people must fear him. This child is going to become someone big. And we almost celebrate the fact that this child is violent. And so we applaud the wrong things, and the child craves that attention and continues to exhibit that abusive behavior, because those are the things we're celebrating and those are the things that we're valuing. So no one's born an abuser. Every single abuser that has abused somebody has learned that behavior from somewhere.
Thank you.
True that. I agree with that. But then my next question is, how do we unlearn that? How do we unlearn that behavior? Because we let's say there's this child who has grown up into this abusive household, and then she or he lived that's a way of doing things. That's a way of getting respect. So how do we teach that girl or that boy that this is not how things are done? How do we help unlearn that behavior?
It's such a beautiful question, and I think it's the real reason why we not only have conversations of this nature, but also you have a lot of NGOs that dedicate their time and their work to try and show our societies how do we coexist in a peaceful way. Now, you can imagine there are men's organizations, for example, where the center of these conversations is to try and unlearn that behavior. I have a core belief, and that belief is conversation is the birthplace of action. So we cannot act differently or behave differently unless at the core we've had a conversation that has shifted the way we think and has shifted the things that we believe, and that then helps us to behave differently. So for example, if there's a man who's grown up believing from the roots of his childhood, grown up believing that a woman is inferior and that if a woman does something wrong, that he has a right. We say in Zulu, which means he has a right to physically straighten her. So almost like, because, in some cultures, women are seen as possessions in the same way as children are seen as possessions of adults. And so a man believes that as one of my children, basically he sees his wife as one of his children, if you do something wrong, I have to beat you into rightness. Now, somebody who has been raised in that culture and been raised with that is not just going to one day wake up and be like, oh, okay, I've got to do things differently. It takes a conversation with somebody that they trust, because also you can have these fancy programs, you can have all of these things. And that's why it's so important to have community-based programs where you are igniting champions within the community. You are going to start the conversation, say, Matota, let's come together. Let's have this conversation. Why can we not continue the way that we're continuing, and showing those men the cycle of abuse, that when you abuse your wife and your son observes you doing that, they grow up thinking that's the right thing to do. Worse still, when you abuse your wife and your daughter observes that, they then go into their marriage and into their relationships believing that that is their portion in life. And so if we are going to change behavior, if we're going to unlearn behavior, if we're going to change mindsets and shift hearts, it starts with the courageous conversation. It starts with some men, as an example, standing up and saying, guys, let's just for a moment pause. Where do we get this thing that we as men have a right to correct the behavior of women through beating them? And let's have a conversation about that. And that's why I applaud the work that you guys are doing, and applaud the work of many other organizations that are courageous enough to ask the tough questions. And sometimes the tough questions aren't in these fancy places. They start at home. Right? So when you have an arbitrary rule in your house that says the girl children have to be up at 5 a.m. because girl children shouldn't be sleeping in until late, and then the boy child is able to wake up at 7 or 8, and by the time he wakes up, his food is prepared for him, and if he might be even younger, but somehow younger than his sisters, but somehow you anoint him as, you know, the head of the family because he's the boy, and you give him even subconsciously these powers to put his sisters in line. All of that can only be undone when we start asking the conversation, Nozipho, how are you raising your son? Nozipho, why are you having that particular differentiation in terms of how you treat your daughter and how you treat your son? So conversation is the birthplace of action. And that action can be a shift in behavior. It can be a shift in mindset. It can be a shift in belief patterns. It can be a shift in thought patterns. But we cannot change a single thing if we're not prepared to talk about it, but also to talk about it in a radically truthful way.
Thank you very much. I mean, you just hit the nail. I mean, you said a lot of things. I could barely write them all down. You said a lot of things, and just to add to what you're saying, you say the other gender campaign that we're running now. From what you have said conversation is actually the birthplace of action, and that's the truth. You know, from our conversations, we have taken steps from not just having conversations, but bringing these into actions. All right, and one of the things we're doing is what you've rightly mentioned, and I was just smiling within because you don't even know about these. We're launching a project. It's called the Noble Club, and we're seeing how we're raising social workers and educational psychologists, and raising them or training them and sending them to schools, starting these clubs in schools. Noble clubs in schools, in various schools across South Africa, and then eventually in other parts of Africa, sending them to schools to go role models to these children, to go, like you said, they need to start, they can only start changing when they have conversations with someone that they trust, send them there, go be role models to them, be the father figure to them. Some of them don't even have father figures. Be the mother figure to them. Some of them lack these figures, Some of them come from, like you said, from very good homes without abuse, but they come to school and then they mix with very toxic friends, So we are dispatching, like you rightly said, another word you used, champions. That's what we call them, our busy champions. And that's what we call them, So we're dispatching our champions to schools across South Africa, and to just help us run this campaign and, help those children right from their early age up to grade 12. Be there for them, talk to them, be their role model, and that's what we're launching. We've actually put everything together. Hopefully, by the grace of God, we are launching it in June. You understand, and that's it. And all this you're saying, and it's just sinking in. At the point, there was even one of the conversations we had, and someone suggested that, we actually incorporate these into the educational system. Talk to the Department of Education, let them put it as part of the life orientation, right? Life orientation, let it be part of the education system, It is not just what we run in as clubs anymore. But then, of course, we have to run it, see the progress and the success before we, present it to the Department of Education. But that's what we're doing. And I really want to applaud you for the points that you have raised. And you just touched some of the things. And actually, now I'm sure and I'm convinced that my team is in the right direction, Yeah.
No, that's good to hear. That's good to hear.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And you talked about abuse. I mean, there's a lot of argument that goes around that says men are now becoming more victims of abuse. Because these conversations are going on, and but these conversations, many of these conversations actually just talk about the women and give women more power. Men are now becoming more victims of abuse, and they also need their voices heard as well. I mean, what's your position on this?
Thank you for the question. I think the question is problematic because it assumes that we need to compare the abuse between men and women. That this idea that there's this new phenomenon where men are being more abused by women. What we should be concerning ourselves with is, how do we, one, prevent abuse irrespective of who the victim is going to be? And once abuse has taken place, how do we protect the victims and support the victims? And how do we bring about justice for every one of those victims? I think what is different now, and I think this is encouraging, is that because the spotlight on gender-based violence is just so bright right now, and it is becoming, we're holding each other to account, we're having these conversations, we're bringing it more to the light. The idea that a man or my husband can just beat me because he feels that that's something that he has the right to do is no longer normal. Even in families and relationships where it might be normal, because there's so much light on this issue, people are pausing and saying, oh, hold on, this doesn't feel right. In the same way, I do not believe that the abuse of men is something new. The difference, I think, of what is happening is that more men are now feeling empowered, freed from the shame that they've had to be confronted with, to say, how do I, as a man in my masculinity, own the fact that I have been abused by a woman or another man? And what we are doing as a society through these conversations is we're normalizing speaking up and speaking out. And so more men are also now finding their own voices to say, it is okay for me to be both a man and speak truth to me being a victim of abuse. I think what we need to be careful of as a society is that if we go to the example of children, does it matter if it's a girl child who's gotten abused or a boy child? And if we use, for example, abuse in the form of rape, right? Does it matter if it's a rape of a girl child or is it the rape of a boy child? What matters is that children should not be raped. What matters is that we need to be educating our society such that we have these preventative measures that make sure that no children should be raped. And if it does happen, it doesn't matter if it's a boy child or girl child. How do we protect and support that child and help the child go through their own process of healing while we bring justice to what has happened? And so I think we need to be very careful to not get ourselves into a competitive conversation about who's a bigger victim than the other. Anybody who's been abused is a victim. Anybody who's been raped is a victim. And I really think that the best way we are going to really tackle this issue is if we come with that consolidated view to say, as a society, we say no to the abuse of women and we say no to the abuse of men. And that's because we're saying no to abuse as a phenomenon, as a starting point. We're saying that this is not a normal way of engaging, irrespective of who the victim really is going to be.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Sis Nozipho. With all these campaigns, those movements that are being done, whether by the government or the NPOs, are we really doing enough to fight gender inequalities, to fight gender-based violence? Because now everybody has become aware of, okay, there's gender-based violence, there's gender inequality, but are we really doing it? Like, are we really